Hudson Zeller didn't plan on crashing his own best friend's surprise party, but when his private jet landed in Aspen early and the event planner wouldn't let him through the ballroom doors, he found himself face to face with the most infuriatingly beautiful woman he'd ever met. "I'm sorry, sir, but no one gets inside until I say so," the woman said, blocking the entrance with a clipboard clutched to her chest and a stance that said she was dead serious. Hudson raised a brow. "I'm not a guest. I'm the one surprising the guest of honor." She didn't budge. "And I'm the one making sure the surprise doesn't turn into a disaster." "You can wait." He blinked. No one told him no. Not investors, not board members, and definitely not event planners in floor-length black dresses and messy topknots that somehow made them look like they were born to run the world. "What's your name?" he asked, folding his arms. "Kennedy Tate," she replied, chin lifting. "And you are?" He leaned against the wall, amused. She clearly had no idea who he was. "Hudson." "Hudson who?" He offered a slow grin. "Zeller." Her eyes widened just enough for him to catch it before she masked it with a tight smile. "Oh," she breathed. "As in, Hudson Zeller, Hudson Zeller. The one and only." Kennedy's hand flew to her earpiece. "Cancel the delay. The CEO just arrived early." Hudson chuckled. "You okay there, Kennedy?" She turned, cheeks flushed but voice cool. "I had this entire night timed down to the second. You showing up early just threw off the lighting cue, the cake entrance, and the live quartet's first note." "I was excited," he said, shrugging. "It's not every day your best friend turns 35. Kennedy shook her head, muttering something about billionaires and no respect for schedules as she pulled open the doors and waved him inside. The ballroom was breathtaking. Soft white lights floated above like stars, and a floor-to-ceiling wall of glass revealed the snow-covered mountains beyond. Guests were just beginning to arrive, champagne flutes in hand, laughter echoing off the marble floors. "Don't touch anything," Kennedy warned as he walked past her. "And try not to ruin any more of my plans." Hudson paused, turned, and smiled at her. "You did all this?" She nodded. "It's stunning." That threw her more than his name had. "Thanks," she said slowly, tucking his stray hair behind her ear. "Now go blend in." He did, but not before sneaking one last look at the woman who had no idea she just stomped across the very first crack in his perfect, controlled world. The party was a hit. His best friend, Logan, was blindsided in a good way, and the Aspen Lodge pulsed with laughter and music as the night wore on. Hudson made his rounds, offering firm handshakes and polite smiles, but his eyes kept drifting back to the woman in black who flitted around the room like a conductor keeping an orchestra in perfect harmony. He found her minutes later in the corner, whispering to a server about the cake timing. "Need help?" he asked, stepping up beside her. Kennedy didn't even look at him. "Unless you know how to fix a melted chocolate garnish in under a minute, no. I can write a $10 million check to fix it." She gave him a look. "Or you could just let me do my job. You're very confident." "I'm very good." Hudson laughed, and Kennedy blinked like she hadn't expected that sound from him. "I like you," he said. Her brows lifted. "You don't know me. I know you're not impressed by titles or money. That's impressive enough." Kennedy's face softened just enough to make his chest tighten. Then the music swelled, the lights dimmed, and the cake made its entrance exactly on cue. She exhaled, satisfied. "Perfect." Hudson leaned in. "So what happens now?" "You disappear into the night like Cinderella?" Her eyes flicked to him. Cinderella didn't run an entire kingdom behind the scenes. "Touché." They stood there, not speaking, as the room filled with applause and Logan made a toast. Then Kennedy said, "You said Logan's your best friend?" "Since we were kids." "He's family. That makes you dangerous." Hudson arched a brow. "Dangerous? To my career? I don't date clients. Or friends of clients." He stepped closer. "I didn't ask you on a date." "Good. But I might." She stared up at him, challenge in her eyes. "Don't." Hudson had built companies from the ground up, negotiated billion-dollar deals, bought out competitors with a handshake and a smile. But he had a strange feeling that convincing Kennedy Tate to have dinner with him might be the hardest deal of his life. He was already hooked. The next morning, Hudson stood on the terrace of his penthouse suite, coffee in hand, still thinking about her. About the way she took charge of a room without needing to raise her voice. About how she didn't flinch when he said his name or back down when he challenged her. He was supposed to fly back to New York that afternoon. He didn't. Instead, he called his assistant and cleared his schedule for the week. Then he called the front desk and booked the entire floor below his suite for an extended business stay. Hudson Zeller never stayed anywhere longer than necessary. His life was too full, too fast, too structured for that. But something about Kennedy made him want to stay. Made him want to slow down. And for the first time in years, Hudson wasn't thinking about boardrooms or bottom lines. He was thinking about a woman who wore a headset like a crown and ran a ballroom like a queen. And how if he had anything to say about it, she wouldn't just plan his next event. She'd be the center of it. Kennedy was elbow-deep in floral arrangements when the scent of roasted espresso hit her nose. She looked up from the table of white peonies and nearly dropped the pruning shears. Hudson Zeller stood in the doorway of the studio holding 2 coffee cups and looking entirely too comfortable for a man who was supposed to be back in Manhattan. "I brought peace offerings," he said, walking in like he belonged there. "You're still in Aspen?" she asked, more surprised than she cared to admit. He handed her one of the cups. "I decided to extend the trip." Kennedy narrowed her eyes. "Let me guess. Logan begged you to stick around." "I didn't tell him I was staying." She took the coffee, cautious now. "So this is what, a coincidence? Do you believe in those?" "No," she said flatly. "Neither do I." Kennedy didn't respond. She set the coffee down and returned to arranging the centerpiece. Hudson moved in beside her, watching her hands as she worked, but not touching anything this time. "Are you always like this?" he asked. "Like what?" "Precise. Focused. Controlled. I plan luxury events for a living. If I'm not all those things, people end up proposing during the salad course and crying under the dessert table." He laughed again, lower this time, not for show. "I meant it as a compliment. I'll try to pretend it sounded like one." She grabbed a strip of silk ribbon and tied it around the base of the vase, then handed it off to an assistant who hovered nearby. Hudson stayed quiet, watching her. "You're good at this. I've built my company from the ground up." "I'd better be." "How long ago?" 6 years. He nodded slowly. "That's impressive. Why are you really here, Hudson?" Instead of answering, he walked to the window overlooking the snow-covered hills. "Do you remember when you were a kid and the world felt like it had no edges? Like anything was possible?" Kennedy's brows drew together. "Sort of. I used to feel like that every time I visited Aspen with Logan. We were nobodies back then. Just 2 kids with big ideas and no idea what the world would cost." She leaned against the table behind her. "And now? Now the world has a price tag." Kennedy watched him for a moment, trying to reconcile the man in the suit with the one who sounded like he just peeled back a layer no one else had seen. "So you stayed because you're chasing nostalgia?" His eyes met hers. "No. I stayed because you're the first person in years who's looked me in the eye and told me I was an inconvenience." She exhaled, half laughing. "You're something else. I hope that's not an insult. It's not a compliment." He took a step closer. "You fascinate me, Kennedy." She crossed her arms. "That sounds like the beginning of a very inappropriate sentence. But it's not. Not yet." She swallowed, pulse kicking up. "Don't flirt with me." "Why not?" "Because I have a contract with Logan's company for the next 2 months. And because I don't trust men who fly private jets and quote childhood memories like poetry." Hudson tilted his head. "What would it take for you to trust me?" A beat of silence passed. Then she said, "Consistency." He nodded once, as if making a mental note. "Fair enough. Now if you're done disrupting my workspace—" "I'm not," he cut in. "I want to hire you." Kennedy blinked. "Excuse me? I'm throwing a benefit gala in New York 3 weeks from now. It's for a foundation I started in my mother's name. I want you to organize it. You already have a team for that. I fired them yesterday." Kennedy stared at him. "You're insane. I'm effective. You can't just decide, I can." And I did. She tried to read him, tried to find the angle. Are you offering me this because of what I can do, or because of how I look when I'm telling you off? Both. But mostly because I don't trust anyone else to make it mean something. Kennedy hesitated. I'd have to fly out this week. Meet with vendors. Visit the venue. I'll take care of everything. Private jet, suite at the Whitmore, access to my team. I don't want to owe you anything. You won't, he said. Then added, unless you count the coffee. Kennedy turned away, partly to think, partly to breathe. She could feel the weight of his gaze on her back, steady and unrelenting. I'll think about it, she said. I already booked the jet. She turned back, startled. You're really not used to people saying no, are you? I'm not used to people making me want them to say yes. She didn't respond. Couldn't. Because something shifted in her chest at that something she hadn't felt in a long time. And that scared her more than any contract ever could. Later that night, Kennedy stood on the deck of her rental cabin, staring out at the untouched snowbanks glowing under the moonlight. Her assistant had already left for the evening. Her phone buzzed with new inquiries and vendor messages, but she ignored them. She was thinking about Hudson. About the way he'd peeled back just enough of himself to make her wonder what else was underneath. She was also thinking about what it would mean to say yes. Not just to the gala, but to the idea of stepping into his world, one filled with power plays, sharp suits, and people who lived behind glass and gold. She wasn't sure if she'd survive it, or if she'd want to come back once she stepped inside. But she already knew one thing. Hudson Zeller wasn't a man who appeared in your life and left it unchanged. He was a storm with a tailored coat and a past he didn't talk about. And somehow, against every instinct she wanted to know what it felt like to stand in the eye of it. The wind off the Hudson River sliced through the layers of Kennedy's coat as she stepped out of the black car and looked up at the towering limestone facade of the Whitmore Hotel. New York pulsed around her horns, heels, hurried voices, but all she could focus on was the anticipation threading through her chest. She'd said yes. Not because of the private jet or the five-star suite Hudson had offered without blinking. Not because of the chance to orchestrate the most high-profile event of her career. But because something in his eyes that morning, a quiet conviction layered beneath his charm, had made her want to see what lay beyond his polished surface. Inside the hotel lobby, golden chandeliers glittered above a marble floor so pristine it reflected the light like water. A uniformed concierge greeted her by name and handed her an envelope. Her name, handwritten in bold strokes, was scrawled across the front. Inside, a single card read, "Welcome to the city. I hope it inspires you." No logo. No title. Kennedy didn't smile, but something softened in her expression as she folded the card and slipped it into her coat pocket. The suite was unlike anything she'd ever seen. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed the skyline in full panoramic detail, and fresh orchids bloomed on every table. But what stopped her was the wall-length corkboard mounted by the far window. It was blank except for a handwritten sign tacked in the center, "Make it unforgettable." She took off her coat, then her shoes. And by the time she stood barefoot before that board, she already saw it, the event, the movement, the story she could build. Behind her, the door clicked open. "I figured you'd be here early," Hudson said, setting a box of takeout on the table. "The vendors are expecting you tomorrow, but I thought you might want to see the venue tonight." Kennedy turned, eyebrows raised. "You bribed someone to let us in after hours? I own the building." She blinked once, then grabbed her coat again. The gala venue sat on the top floor of a newly restored Art Deco skyscraper just south of Central Park. As the elevator doors opened, Kennedy stepped into a space that took her breath in stages, arched windows, bronze columns, a domed ceiling painted with constellations. "It's like stepping into a forgotten century," she murmured, walking slowly across the stone floor. Hudson leaned on the railing near the terrace doors. "My mother loved this building. Used to bring me here when she still had the energy for it. She'd sit right where you're standing and tell me the stars overhead were hers to rearrange." Kennedy turned, surprised by the rawness in his voice. "She passed 5 years ago," he added. "Cancer. Fast." "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "She was the reason I started the foundation. She believed legacy wasn't what you left behind, it was what you built for others to stand on." Kennedy looked up at the ceiling. "You want this night to matter. I don't want it to be pageantry. I want it to reflect her. Graceful, fierce, impossible to ignore." She nodded slowly. Then we can't use a traditional layout. We'll reimagine the space. No assigned tables. Movement, light, texture. Something immersive. Hudson watched her as if the air between them had shifted. You see things differently than anyone I've ever worked with. I don't work with clients. I work with visions. You said you didn't trust men like me, he said, crossing the space between them. Are you still holding that line? I haven't drawn a new one yet, she replied. He stepped closer. What are you afraid will happen if you do? Kennedy didn't answer right away. Outside, the city shimmered like a galaxy in motion. I've spent years building something no one thought I could. I can't afford to fall for someone who moves through life like gravity doesn't apply. Hudson's voice dipped. Then maybe I'll stop moving. She turned her head sharply. Don't say things you don't mean. I never do. Their eyes held for a moment too long, and then Kennedy stepped back. We have work to do. He didn't argue, but he didn't step away either. They stayed at the venue until past midnight, reimagining the space under soft lights and a quiet city sky. Kennedy moved through possibilities with the intensity of someone who saw the world not for what it was but for what it could become. Hudson watched her with the stillness of a man who'd spent too long surrounded by people who only wanted things from him. When they finally walked back into the suite, the silence between them wasn't awkward, it was full. Charged. As Kennedy pulled out her laptop and began sketching out her plan, Hudson leaned against the counter, arms folded. You don't talk about your past, he said. I prefer to build forward. But it's there. I see it in the way you check your footing before you take a step. Like you've been burned before. She looked up. I have. But not the way you think. Try me. Kennedy hesitated. I grew up in a small town where dreams were considered reckless. I was the girl who always wanted too much. I left with 2 suitcases and no safety net. Every event I've ever designed, I did with the understanding that if I failed, I'd have nothing to fall back on. Hudson's brow furrowed. You built this alone. I didn't have a choice. You do now. Her gaze sharpened. Don't offer me safety, Hudson. That's not what I'm looking for. Then what are you looking for? She closed her laptop slowly. Something real. Something that doesn't vanish the second it gets complicated. His jaw flexed, but he said nothing. In the early hours of morning, Kennedy stood at the window again. The city was quieter now, but still alive. Still waiting. And behind her, Hudson remained silent, steady, watching. Neither of them said it, but the truth loomed between them as clearly as the skyline. They were no longer circling each other. They were falling. And neither one of them knew how to stop. The gala unfolded like a dream Kennedy had once dared to have back when she was just a girl sketching centerpieces in the margins of school notebooks. But this was no fantasy. This was real. And it was hers. The venue glowed from within, a constellation of light and movement. Guest senators, artists, entrepreneurs moved through the immersive space she had reimagined. Live musicians played from suspended platforms while cascading floral installations drew the eye upward to the domed ceiling where the projected constellations slowly shifted in rhythm with the music. It was art in motion. A living memory. Hudson stood near the entrance, dressed in a midnight black tuxedo, his expression unreadable. He hadn't interfered once in the last 3 weeks. He'd given her full control, and tonight he looked at everything like he couldn't believe it had come from her mind. Kennedy crossed the polished floor, her deep plum gown brushing the marble with every step. When she reached him, neither of them spoke for a moment. Then he said, "You turned a memorial into something that breathes." She exhaled slowly. It wasn't about making people mourn. It was about making them remember. They will, he said. They already are. Her gaze flicked toward the center of the room. The lights will dim in 20 minutes. That's when the tribute begins. He didn't look at the room. He looked at her. And what happens after tonight? Kennedy kept her voice steady. I fly back to Colorado. I have clients waiting. Hudson's jaw tightened just slightly. You've built something important there. I have. But, she paused. It's not the only thing I want anymore. That admission hung between them like a breath they hadn't taken yet. Then someone called Hudson's name and the moment passed. The tribute began with a hush. The lights lowered until only the ceiling glowed. A montage of video and stills played across the curved walls. Hudson's mother, laughing on a beach, reading to children at a shelter, dancing in a kitchen. Her voice played over the images, reading from a letter she'd written in her final weeks. Legacy, she said, is not a monument. It's a ripple that reaches people you'll never meet. By the time it ended, half the room was quietly wiping their eyes. Kennedy remained near the side, hands clasped in front of her, watching Hudson. He stood still, but she saw it, the way his shoulders had dropped, the way his eyes glistened but didn't fall apart. After the final note faded, applause rose like a wave. And then Hudson stepped forward. He walked to the center without a microphone, without ceremony. The room quieted immediately. My mother believed in building things that outlast you, he said. Tonight, every dollar raised will go directly to education initiatives she started. But this night was never about money. It was about remembering that people like her exist. Then, without warning, he turned toward her. She would have liked Kennedy Tate, he said. Kennedy froze, realizing everyone was now looking at her. She would have admired her strength, her stubbornness, her refusal to flinch in the face of impossible expectations. I do. A quiet stir moved through the room. Kennedy's breath caught. I didn't expect this night to change anything, Hudson continued. But it did. It changed me. And I don't want to go back to who I was before. She walked into that ballroom in Aspen and told me I was disrupting her schedule. Laughter broke through the tension, soft and genuine. Hudson's voice lowered. Kennedy, I tried to stay out of your way. I tried to let your work speak for itself. But I'm done pretending that I can walk away from you and be the same. Kennedy's chest ached. She hadn't seen this coming. Not like this. Not here. I'm not asking you to give anything up, he said. I'm asking you to let me be part of what you're building. To build something together. The room had vanished. It was just him, and her, and the sound of her heart pounding too hard, too fast. She walked to him slowly, her heels echoing across the marble floor. When she stopped just inches away from him, she said, You're standing in front of 200 of the most powerful people in New York. I know. And you're making a personal plea in the middle of a philanthropic tribute. I know that, too. She reached up, touched his jacket at the lapel. Then I guess I have no choice but to say yes. The applause nearly shook the building. Hudson didn't wait. He pulled her into his arms and kissed her, not for show, not for spectacle, but like he'd been waiting his entire life for that one moment of certainty. The gala continued on around them, but neither of them noticed. They were wrapped in something quieter, something deeper than the glitz and glamour. Later that night, they stood alone on the rooftop terrace, the skyline behind them like a promise waiting to be kept. I don't want this to be temporary, Hudson said, his hand warm against her back. I don't want to just fall in love with you in passing. She looked up, her eyes steady. Then don't. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Her breath caught. I wasn't planning on doing this tonight, he said. But I wasn't planning on you either. He opened the box. Inside, a ring glittered against dark velvet. But it wasn't the size or the sparkle that made her breath hitch, it was the engraving inside. Barely visible. Not a monument. A ripple. You don't have to answer now, he said quickly. I wanted you to know where this is going for me. Kennedy took the ring, turned it in her fingers, then met his gaze. I don't need more time. He froze. I've spent my whole life building something that felt unshakable, she said. But what I didn't realize until you showed up was that it's okay to build something with someone else. As long as it's with the right person. Hudson stepped closer, his voice low. And am I? She slid the ring onto her finger. You are. They stood there as the city pulsed around them, no longer two separate forces orbiting each other. They were aligned. And this time, the future wasn't something to chase. It was something they'd build together. 3 months later, Kennedy stepped through the tall, glass doors of the Zeller Foundation's new headquarters, her heels clicking softly on the polished stone floor. The final touches had just been completed: custom lighting, hand-painted murals from local artists, and a suspended garden stretching across the atrium ceiling. It wasn't just a building. It was a promise fulfilled. I thought I might find you here, Hudson said, appearing from the side hallway, his tie loose, jacket slung over his forearm. Kennedy turned, her expression already softening. I had to see it before the first board meeting. It doesn't feel real yet. He looked around the atrium. It's more than real. It's yours. She walked toward him, her hand brushing the edge of the long reception table. Ours. You insisted I co-chair the foundation. You didn't hesitate to take the reins, he said. I never planned to stay in New York, she admitted, lifting her eyes to meet his. But I couldn't imagine leaving either. Not anymore. Hudson stepped closer, his voice lower. You haven't just stayed. You've reshaped everything around you. Including me. Kennedy's lips curved. You only think that because I made you get rid of the second espresso machine in your office. That machine was sacred. It was excessive. He laughed, but his gaze was steady. You know, I used to think legacy was about permanence. About buildings, stock portfolios, long-lasting power. But then you walked in and reminded me that it's about the people we're willing to fight for. And the ones we're willing to let in. Kennedy tilted her head slightly. Is that your new philosophy? It's my truth. He reached for her hand, intertwining his fingers with hers. And you're at the center of it. They stood in the middle of the atrium, light filtering down through the garden canopy, surrounded by everything they'd built, not just the foundation, but the life that had grown quietly, steadily, between gala meetings and late-night planning sessions, between whispered confessions and open laughter. I signed the lease on the townhouse, she said, watching his reaction carefully. The one down on Perry Street. You said it was too quiet, but I liked that it had room. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. For what? For us, she said simply. And for the possibility of more. They didn't need to say it aloud. The word lingered between them like a soft echo. Family. Hudson brought her hand to his lips. I didn't think I could have this. Not after everything. Not with someone who sees every flaw and stays anyway. You didn't have flaws, Kennedy said. You had walls. And I was never afraid of climbing. He pulled her into his arms, his voice brushing against her ear. I love you. She held him tighter. I know. I've known since the night you stood under that ceiling and risked everything to say it in front of all those people. Hudson leaned back just enough to look at her. You never told me what your mother said when you called her. Kennedy laughed softly. She said, if this man convinced you to slow down long enough to fall in love, he must be either a magician or a lunatic. She paused. Then she cried. I'll take lunatic, Hudson said. You're both, she teased. He kissed her again, slower this time, and when they pulled apart, she rested her forehead against his. There's one more thing, he said, reaching into his pocket. Something I've been carrying around for a while. She stepped back as he pulled out a folded piece of paper. Not a ring. Not a contract. A deed. Her brow furrowed. What's this? I bought the ballroom in Aspen. The one where we met. Her breath caught. You didn't. I did. It was being sold to a hotel chain. I couldn't let it go. Hudson. He held the paper out. It's yours. For your company. For whatever you want it to be. A flagship venue. A creative hub. A place you can always return to. Kennedy took the paper slowly, her fingers trembling. You remembered everything. I never forgot a single second. Later that night, they stood on the rooftop terrace of their new townhouse, the city sprawling out below them like an endless painting in motion. The air was warm, the lights of the city flickering like candlelight. I used to think love had to be loud, Kennedy said quietly. All-consuming. Dramatic. But this is steady. It holds me without asking me to disappear. Hudson wrapped his arms around her from behind. Because it's not built on what we gave up. It's built on what we chose. As the city moved beneath them, Kennedy leaned into him, her voice quiet. Then I choose this. I choose you. And I'll keep choosing you, Hudson said. Every day. Every version of you. Every new chapter. They stood there as the night deepened, no longer two people from separate worlds but one story, written together in ink that didn't fade. The foundation launched with record support. Kennedy's company expanded into New York with the Aspen venue as its crown jewel. Clients followed her not because of her connection to Hudson, but because her work spoke for itself. And in every decision, in every new leap, they stood side by side. Years later, on a quiet morning in that same townhouse, Kennedy stood in the nursery rocking gently as the world outside stirred awake. Hudson leaned in the doorway, watching her, their daughter asleep in her arms. You still fascinate me, he whispered. Kennedy looked up, smiling. You still break every rule I ever made. He crossed the room and kissed her temple. And you rebuilt them. around us. Together, they had built something permanent. Not a monument, a ripple. And it would never stop moving.